James never believed in the stories his grandfather told about the things that moved through the woods when the world slept. He just wanted a break from city life. Silence. Solitude. Maybe even inspiration for the novel he always said he'd write. So, when he found the remote cabin listing buried in an old hiking forum, it felt like fate. He drove 7 hours into a part of the map where the roads lost their names. The directions were handwritten. The air got colder, the woods denser, and by the time he arrived, the sun had nearly vanished behind the trees. People always talk about how peaceful it is to be alone in the woods, how silence is good for the soul. James had believed that too. At least, he did before that weekend. Before the cabin. Before the first night when everything shifted. He arrived just before sunset. The dirt road had narrowed until it was barely wide enough for his car. The last half-mile was more of a trail than a driveway, winding through dense pine trees that pressed in too close, like they didn't want him there. When he finally parked, the cabin stood waiting, silent, slouched, as if time had folded it in on itself. It was old, no doubt about that. The wooden planks were weathered and gray, the windows fogged over from years of neglect. It looked exactly like the pictures he'd seen online, only lonelier, almost resentful. But James didn't think too much of it. He liked the idea of isolation. No emails. No traffic. No people. Inside, the cabin had a single room with a tiny stone fireplace, one dusty bed, a sink that only offered cold well water, and a bookshelf built into the wall. The furniture was stiff and creaky, and everything smelled like damp firewood and something older, like forgotten ashes. But it was quiet. That kind of heavy, pressing quiet you don't realize exists until you're far from the world. James spent the evening unpacking, starting a fire, and cooking a can of soup on the old gas burner. He felt calm, content even. But as the fire crackled lower and the forest outside darkened, that quiet began to change. It wasn't peace anymore. It was stillness. Like the entire forest was holding its breath. Then he found the book. It was on the shelf, tucked between warped encyclopedias and yellowed paperbacks. Bound in cracked leather, no title. Just a strange symbol etched into the spine, almost like a knot, or an eye drawn with a shaky hand. Inside were woodcut drawings. Primitive, grotesque images of twisted figures in forests, long-limbed shadows behind trees, people with no eyes staring at the sky. James didn't like it, but he kept flipping the pages. That's when he heard it. Outside. A noise. It was subtle, but impossible to ignore. A faint crunch, like a footfall in wet leaves. Deliberate. Slow. Not like an animal darting through the underbrush. No, this was rhythmic. Almost careful. He froze. Listened. Another step. He grabbed his flashlight and moved to the small window beside the fireplace. The glass was cloudy, but he could make out the vague shapes of trees, tall, spindly, shifting slightly in the breeze. Fog had started to roll in, turning everything into silhouettes. Nothing moved. For a moment, he almost laughed at himself. Of course there'd be noises. He was in the woods, after all. But then, there it was again. This time, from the other side of the cabin. He walked quickly to the back window, heart suddenly knocking a little faster. He clicked on the flashlight, scanned the edge of the tree line. Just more fog. More black bark. Nothing unusual. But that stillness hadn't lifted. In fact, it felt thicker. Like the air itself was growing heavier. He stepped outside. The moment he opened the door, he regretted it. The cold hit him first, sudden and unnatural, like he'd walked into a basement with the heat turned off. The second thing he noticed was the silence. True silence. His boots crunched on gravel as he stepped onto the ground. But there was no echo. No bounce. It was like the sound died the second it left his mouth. He cupped his hands and shouted, "Hello?" Just to break the tension. Nothing. Not even birds. Not even wind. He panned the flashlight across the woods. The beam hit trees, fog, moss-covered ground. But nothing else. No eyes staring back. No footprints. Just the forest standing there, watching. And yet, James couldn't shake the feeling that something had just ducked out of view. Just behind the tree. Just behind the next breath. He backed up toward the cabin, flashlight still raised. Something about the shadows between the trees looked off. Too deep. Too dense. Like they were folding in on themselves. He couldn't explain it, but it felt wrong. Once back inside, he locked the door. Double-checked the windows. Sat down in front of the fire again. But it wasn't comforting anymore. The flames didn't flicker like they had before. They moved erratically, casting jagged shadows on the walls. And then, the sound came again. This time, a slow, deliberate scratch against the wooden wall behind him. Not long. Just one slow stroke, like a nail dragged across the surface. It was so precise, it almost sounded intentional. James didn't move. The fire sputtered. The shadows danced. He waited for another sound, another sign, but nothing came. Just silence again. He barely slept that night. The feeling of being watched lingered. Not from one place, but from every direction. Like the trees outside weren't trees anymore, like they had eyes. By morning, the sun had returned. James woke up with a jolt. The fire had died sometime during the night. Cold air clung to the cabin like a second skin. Morning light crept in through the cracks in the window shutters, pale and thin, barely warming the room. He sat up slowly, the soreness in his back a reminder of how little sleep he'd gotten. Maybe 2 hours at most. Even though it was daylight, something about the cabin still felt off. The memory of last night's scratching haunted the silence. James checked the wall where he'd heard it, but there was nothing. No mark. No claw. Just smooth wood and the faint scent of soot. He told himself it was an animal. A branch maybe. Or the wind. Something simple. Something explainable. But the explanation didn't sit right. He made coffee using the gas burner and tried to read again. But the book from the night before was still on the table, and he didn't want to touch it. Its cover felt like it had weight now, as if just looking at it too long might open something best left closed. Outside, the forest looked the same. Dense. Still. But now that it was daylight, James realized something that hadn't registered the night before. There were no birds. No rustling. No bugs buzzing in the underbrush. Just trees. Frozen. Like a painting waiting to move. He spent the day walking small loops around the cabin, not straying too far. He had a map, sure, but he wasn't stupid. You don't wander into unfamiliar woods alone without marking your trail. But even with every step, he couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was watching him. That the trees were leaning in a little more than they had the day before. Still, he didn't see anything. And by late afternoon, he managed to convince himself that the night before had just been an overreaction. A first night scare. He'd driven for hours, slept badly, and spent the day alone with no signal or real human contact. His brain was probably just on edge. He ate dinner early and made sure the fire was strong, trying to keep the room bright. But as night fell, that creeping sense of unease returned like a tide. It was subtle at first, a pressure in the air, a weight in his chest that didn't come from anxiety, but something else. Something waiting. Later, just after 10, he stepped outside to brush his teeth. The water pump was about 15 feet from the back door, and the flashlight he kept clipped to his belt flickered as he moved toward it. He noticed the temperature had dropped sharply. His breath came out in clouds. And that's when he saw it. There, in the cabin's back window, a face. Pale. almost white, completely still. It wasn't shaped like a regular face. Too narrow, too stretched. No eyebrows, no hair. Just hollow black eyes and a mouth slightly agape, as if it had been caught in the middle of a whisper. James froze. The toothbrush slipped from his hand, landed in the dirt. His first thought wasn't fear, it was disbelief. He blinked, stared, hoping the fog or the reflection had tricked his eyes. But the face didn't vanish. It just watched. When he finally moved, running back inside with his heart pounding and fists clenched, the face was gone. He scanned every corner of the room, checked behind furniture, under the bed, even in the tiny cupboard beneath the sink. Nothing. But there, on the inside of the window, just where he'd seen the face pressed, was a smear. Long, greasy. As if something moist had leaned in too close. He didn't sleep. He lay in bed with a knife gripped under his pillow, eyes on the door, ears straining at every creak and groan of the old cabin. The fire hissed and popped, but even the warmth it gave off felt hollow now. Like it was putting on a show, but couldn't actually protect him. And then, just as he was beginning to drift into a light, uneasy sleep, he heard it. 3 knocks. Not on the door. On the window frame. Soft. Measured. The kind of knock someone gives when they're not in a rush, when they know you're listening. He sat up, frozen, his breathing shallow. It came again. 3 more taps, a little slower this time. Then silence. Then the voice. A whisper. Too close. Too calm. It said his name. Not like a friend calling out from a distance, but like someone leaning over your shoulder while you're sleeping. It wasn't a voice he recognized. It wasn't even fully human. There was something wet in it, something that gurgled beneath the syllables. James didn't move. Not even to breathe. It didn't speak again. No footsteps. No retreating sound. Just quiet. Eventually, the fire died down again. The cold returned. But James didn't sleep. Not that night. Not with that voice still echoing in his ears. He stayed awake until the sky began to lighten, knife still clutched, body stiff with fear. At sunrise, he threw everything into his backpack. He didn't even bother organizing it. Just tossed in the clothes, the books, the food that was left, and the knife. He doused the fireplace and gave the cabin one last look, hoping it would feel like closure. It didn't. It felt like leaving something unfinished. Like he was backing away from something that had already noticed him. When he opened the door, he stopped breathing. The trail, the narrow dirt road that had brought him here, was gone. Completely gone. In its place were trees. Dense. Closer than they should have been. Tighter than he remembered. There was no clear path anymore. No tire tracks. No broken branches. Just wall after wall of pine trunks and a fog that had thickened overnight into a cold, colorless mist that seemed to pulse between the trees. He stood there for a long time, trying to retrace the direction he'd come in from. North. He was sure of it. But no matter how far his eyes searched the woods, all he saw was gray and black and green. No breaks. No markers. He was trapped. He walked for nearly an hour with the pack on his back before the forest grew too quiet again. That same silence from the first night. The kind of silence that made his ears ring. No birds. No wind. Just absence. Like the world had been erased behind him. When he finally circled back, or thought he did, the cabin was waiting for him again. Only now, it didn't look old. It looked empty. Like something had stepped out of it, and was waiting for him to step in. James didn't cry, but something in him gave out. Like his body knew what his mind hadn't admitted yet. There was no getting out. Not on foot. Not in daylight. Not in any way that made sense. So he waited for night. And night didn't wait long. The sun fell fast, and with it came the cold. But this cold was different. Not natural. It crept through the wood, through his jacket, through his bones. He piled every log he had into the fireplace and lit it. The flames struggled. They caught, flickered, but wouldn't stay. Every time he thought it had stabilized, the fire would dim. Flicker. Flicker again. Then die. He'd relight it. Over and over. But it was like something was suffocating the flame. Then the flashlight died. It didn't flicker. It didn't fade. It just snapped off like someone had flipped a switch. James stood there, alone in the dark cabin, heart pounding, ears straining. He clutched the knife tighter than he realized. His knuckles ached from it. Then the door handle moved. Not violently. Not banging or kicking. Just a slow rattle. Like someone testing it. Like fingers that didn't know how a handle worked. It turned. Clicked. Turned again. Then stopped. James screamed. He screamed for whatever it was to go away. His voice broke in the middle, raw from fear. But the moment the sound left his mouth, he heard something else. A voice. Behind him. It didn't answer. It just repeated him. Same words. Same panic. But wrong. Too wet. Too calm. Like it was learning the shape of human speech but hadn't quite figured it out yet. The air behind him dropped in temperature so fast his breath turned solid. But when he spun around, nothing was there. Just the dark. Then the lights flickered. The fireplace caught again. The room lit up in a harsh, ugly orange. And every window, every single one, was filled with faces. Hundreds of them. Pale. Hairless. Expressionless. All watching. They weren't pressed against the glass this time. They just stood behind it. In the fog. In the shadows. Eyes like holes. Mouths slightly open. James backed away from the window, stumbled, and dropped the knife. When he looked again, the faces were closer. No footsteps. No movement. Just closer. He doesn't remember what happened next. Not clearly. Something, panic, instinct, desperation, took over. He must have run. Maybe he passed out. Maybe something pulled him out. All he knows is that he woke up on the side of a paved road the next morning, 20 miles from where he should have been. Mud up to his knees. Hands bruised. Shirt torn. No backpack. No knife. No cabin. Just asphalt. Trees. And silence. He flagged down a car. The driver didn't ask many questions, just took one look at him and drove. Later, James tried to retrace his steps. Find the listing. Call the owner. Nothing. The cabin was gone. The website was gone. The photos? All 404 errors. Even the rental confirmation in his inbox had disappeared like it had never existed. No one he contacted remembered the place. Not even the ranger station. But some nights, when the power flickers or the trees outside lean in too close, James swears he hears it. 3 knocks. Soft. Measured. And then, a whisper. A voice just outside the window. Not calling out. Not screaming. Just whispering his name. Over and over. Like it remembers him. Like it's still waiting. And then, a week later, a new listing appeared online. No photos. Just a vague description. Quiet cabin, deep woods, great for solitude. And the price? Unbelievably cheap.